In this video tutorial, we look at the different types of sentence patterns. And the aim of this video tutorial is that after you've seen it, that you'll be able to distinguish between a sentence and a clause. And you'll be able to distinguish between a simple sentence which includes a non-finite clause or a verbal clause, compound sentence, how to punctuate it, a complex sentence and how to punctuate that, and a compound complex sentence. So hopefully you'll be able to distinguish and understand what these different things are. A sentence then must have at least one clause. That's the minimum it can have. A sentence has to begin with a capital letter and end with a full stop. Basic stuff you might think, but sometimes this is forgotten by students when they write their papers. So, we drove the car to the school. An example sentence. And in this example sentence, you have the capital letter and you have the full stop. And there's at least one clause. That is, there's a subject and there's a finite verb. Excuse me. A sentence could have many clauses within it as well, unlike the one that you just previously saw. And if this is the case, then the sentence must have the necessary punctuation. And by that we mean a comma, because this is an adverbial that begins with a subordinating conjunction. There. And then we have, so this provides the background context here. Then we have a clause that begins here. We caught a bus to Acton. And what was happening in Acton? Well, in Acton where the party was planned, so this is one clause. Then you notice there's a comma and the word and. Then you have another clause, we danced. And then until we saw the sun rising. So you see there were lots of different ideas here, different contextual features. And the important part is that you have the appropriate punctuation, which helps the reader understand what it is you're trying to say. So, a clause then has to have a subject and a finite verb, for example. And we can signify this by this symbol, a triangle. And a non-finite clause, which is also known as a verbal clause if you're studying the Grammar to Go coursebook, has excuse me again. We use this as a symbol to show that it's a non-finite clause. And this means there's no finite verb. It's been excluded as the speaker or the writer chooses another format. Here's an example of a non-finite verb, a non-finite clause. After kissing the girl, the boy said good night. So here, in this instance here, there is no finite verb, only a non-finite verb, kissing. Now, a speaker could have chosen another format. Could have said, sorry, we have that's the non-finite clause. Instead of using a non-finite clause, the speaker or the writer could have chosen a finite clause here. After he kissed the girl. So you notice this is a finite verb form. So a simple sentence, for example, the boy kissed the girl, and this is the symbol that we use here. But a simple sentence doesn't mean it's short or necessarily easy to understand. A simple sentence simply means there's one subject and one finite verb, but there might be other non-finite verbs, there might be adverbials, there might be lots of wording in it as well. Now a simple sentence, this is also a simple sentence, even though there's a non-finite clause there. And you could symbolize it like this. There's one subject, one finite verb, and there's the non-finite verb. And then you have the boy said good night is this triangle there. Let's take another example. The boy said good night after kissing the girl. Now we have the position has been changed, and you could symbolize that in the following way. And you have the non-finite verb there this time. You can also have a non-finite verb in this format here, and that could be symbolized as such, where you have the excuse me once again, you have the non-finite verb in the middle there, and the triangle symbolizes the subject, the boy, kissed the girl. So here are examples of simple sentences in a paper, for example, that might be written. The aircraft crew were exhausted. The aircraft crew had been in the air for 10 hours, and the aircraft crew boarded in Stockholm. So you have three ideas, and in each sentence there's a full stop, and a full stop, and a full stop. Now, of course, it sounds very simplistic and repetitive to have a paper and speak in this kind of form. So sometimes we have what is called a compound sentence, and in this case you have these two ideas here. This is the first idea and this is the second idea, and instead of having two separate sentences, you put it in one sentence. So you have the aircraft crew had been in the air for 10 hours, that's this one here, a comma, and then you have another clause, and that's this one here. These are the coordinating conjunctions, and a useful mnemonic is fanboys, and if you remember that, then these are the coordinating conjunctions there. And these coordinating conjunctions, they can grammatically connect two words or two phrases or two clauses which are of the same value. And a compound sentence, sometimes compound sentences are incorrectly punctuated when learners are writing their papers. You see, a compound sentence cannot be punctuated simply by a comma by itself. This is not allowed. So you have the following choices when you're writing your compound sentence. Instead of separating two clauses by a comma, which you are not allowed to do, these are your choices. You can have a comma and a coordinator together, then this is correct here. That's one choice you can have. Your second choice is you can use a colon, and this shows a coordination. Your third choice is that you convert the two the two clauses into two simple sentences. So you write it in such, add a full stop, and you have a clause there. Alternatively, you can convert into what is called a complex sentence, and there you can connect it with a comma, but the reason you can do that is because now you have this thing here. It's a subordinator and not a coordinator, and you've converted the compound sentence into a complex sentence. And what that means, as you will shortly see, is that the relationship isn't equal, but in this last sentence in green, the relationship is like this. So why don't we actually talk about a complex sentence? In this situation here, you have the aircraft crew were exhausted. This is the main clause på svenska, huvudsatsen. Och så har du en bisats. Och bisatsen börjar med with this thing because it's a subordinator. And for this, you then call the one at the top the main clause, also huvudsats, or the independent clause, huvudsats, and the dependent or the subordinate clause, which is the bisats. Now, excuse me, if you were going to analyze this sentence, as a whole, then what you would have is, this is the subject here, this is the predicate, sorry, the predicator were exhausted, and all of this, the dependent clause, all of this is an adverbial. Why? Because it answers why they were exhausted. So all of this is an adverbial. And then what you can do is you could analyze the adverbial furthermore. And in this adverbial you have this here is the subordinator, and within this adverbial, so this is a subordinator, and in this adverbial you have the subject, and this is the predicator, had been, and it's in the air for 10 hours. So this would be an adverbial complement, and this last part is an adverbial. So you can see that you can have a clause within a clause, and that's what a complex sentence is. The relationship is a different kind. If we go on to another example, perhaps. I've changed the word order around here. What does this complex sentence look like? Well, you have this situation here, and you have this time this situation where you have the independent clause, Huvudssats, also bisatsen, and you notice for it to be a bisats, for it to be a dependent or a subclause, you must have a subordinator. Now, because it's not the only subordinator, there are quite a few. I suggest you look in your respective course books to find out what they are. And if you were to analyze this sentence, then you have, once again, you have the subject here, and take that away, and you have the predicator there, and all of this here is an adverbial. So this is at the top level. This is at this level here. Then you have to break this down further, and as we've been learning on our course, you could break this down further, and you see that this is a noun phrase at the level of phrase, and this is a verb phrase here. And in that verb phrase there are two verbs. You have the help verb here, and you have the lexical verb there, and you have the different parts of the noun phrase. And then you can go into the adverbial here, and you can call this a subordinator. You take that to the side, that's a subordinator, and then it's a subject, and you have the predicator, and the adverbial complement, and the adverbial. And then you can break that down further as well. You can also have a complex sentence where the dependent clause is within. So if you look at this example here, what has happened? You have a dependent clause which is within the other one. Well, let's backtrack there a moment. And if we were analyzing this sentence, then you have all of this here. Here's the subject, and this is the predicator. Now, when you analyze further the subject, then you have you can start off by saying there's a noun phrase, and within that noun phrase you've got a head, and there's a pre-modifier, and there's a post-modifier. And the post-modifier, how is that post-modifier realized? It's realized as a dependent clause. And this is the dependent clause here. And in this dependent clause you have a subject, who, a predicator, had been, and so on. You can analyze that further as well. Now, just to make it very clear for you here that I'm distinguishing between a simple sentence, which includes a non-finite clause, and the previous one where we looked at a complex sentence, because a complex sentence means that there's a finite clause within it. Now in this case, it's only a simple sentence because what you have in the middle is a non-finite clause. Okay, it's a circle in the middle. This is a symbol I'm using, of course, rather than a triangle. And because it's a non-finite clause, a circle, then it's still a simple sentence. Excuse me. So now we look at what is called a compound complex sentence. Now, for a compound complex sentence, what does it look like symbolically? You have John followed Mary here. This is John followed Mary, comma, and Adam watched Sarah, who lived across the street. So you have a clause within a clause there. And for a compound complex sentence, there must be at least 3 finite verbs. 3 finite verbs and 3 subjects. This is what you need to have for it to be compound complex. And if you were to analyze this, then you would have you'd have your sentence, which is your top level. Then you'd have clause 1. Then you have a coordinator, a coordinating conjunction, we call that CC, and then you have clause 2. So you have John followed Mary, and then you have Adam watched Sarah, who lived across the street. And then you can analyze this more in detail. Here's another example. And what does this look like in triangular form? Well, this time you have because John followed Mary. You have a subordinator here. Because John followed Mary, comma, Adam watched Sarah, comma, and he wrote his observations. And if you were analyzing this sentence, then you would have the sentence is the top level, and you'd have clause 1, clause 2, and a coordinating conjunction, which is and here it would be he wrote his observations, and over here you have, as I've already showed you, this situation here. And how you would analyze this one is excuse me, you have an adverbial there. This is the subject, Adam, the predicator, and the direct object. So this is at that top level. And then you can analyze this further. This here is the subordinator, and you have the subject, predicate, and direct object. Once again, for a compound complex sentence, you must have at least 3 finite verbs. So, I hope that you have found this useful, and that's the end.